with one hand on the steering wheel and the other continuously reaching for his phone whenever it lit up. He was navigating through traffic. "We need to talk" was still the message on his lock screen. Jasmine. Kirk let out a long breath and tightened her grip on the steering wheel. He struggled to put the past behind him, but that one message had the ability to pull him back. He stopped on the side of the road and gazed at the text for a considerable amount of time. When he eventually typed, his jaw tightened. "What is this about?" The response arrived sooner than he had anticipated. "Please, come on over. It is crucial." Kirk reclined in his chair, pressing his head against the headrest. His gut urged him to disregard it. The one chapter he never wanted to reopen was Jasmine. However, he couldn't quite put his finger on why the urgent, serious tone of her message unnerved him. Meanwhile, across town, Rasheeda was seated in her office studying fashion samples and drawing notes for the upcoming launch. She exuded composure, stability, and organization. For the first time in a long time, things seemed normal again. Business was performing nicely. Her marriage seemed to be solid. Recently, Kirk has been very calm, attending more events and improving his communication skills. She didn't frequently feel protected in her relationship. She pulled up her phone for a second and noticed a gossip page post come up. Jasmine spotted in Atlanta again. After pausing and gazing at it for a while, Rasheeda locked her phone. Anyway, she's irrelevant now. But even if she didn't want to admit it, the name scratched at something deep inside her. A scrape she ignored, but one that would quickly develop into something much worse. At last, Kirk restarted the vehicle and drove in the direction of Jasmine's residence. His chest felt heavier the closer he got. It wasn't simply awkward to see Jasmine again. It was a trigger, a memory of suffering, treachery, and upheaval he would never want to experience again. However, something in her voice gave him the impression that this wasn't a joke. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an attempt to get attention. It was authentic. Jasmine was seated at her dining table at her apartment, gazing at a sealed package and a pile of documents. She stroked the edge of the envelope, her fingers shaking a little. Her eyes were exhausted, almost lifeless. "I didn't want to do this, but he deserves to know," she muttered to herself. She froze when there was a knock on the door. She wiped her eyes swiftly, took a steady breath, and opened it. Kirk was stiff, cautious, and irritated as he stood there. "Let's just get to the point," he stated as he entered. Jasmine gestured for him to take a seat. With his arms folded and his gaze icy, he sat rigidly. Her fingers were curled together uncomfortably as she sat across from him. "What's happening?" Kirk asked in a pointed tone. Before she spoke, Jasmine swallowed. "Kirk, if it weren't serious, I wouldn't call you." He leaned forward a little. "Enough severe things have happened in the past. Simply state it." With trembling hands, Jasmine took up the envelope. "The way you believe. This has nothing to do with the past. It's something that wasn't properly addressed. Something you must understand." Kirk became more irritated. "Stop talking in riddles. What are you discussing?" Slowly, Jasmine opened the envelope. She pulled out the documents and gave them to him. Kirk's demeanor drastically altered when he glanced over the first page. "Paternity revaluation request" was written in big characters at the top of the page. Stunned, Kirk glanced up at Jasmine. "What is this?" Jasmine's voice broke. "Kirk, it's possible that the last test wasn't reliable." The room was so completely silent that it seemed oppressive. Kirk turned the pages, finding updated information, explanations, and lab notices. His respiration became erratic. "What precisely are you saying?" Then, he insisted, "Just express it plainly." Jasmine used her sleeve to dab at a tear. "Maybe what transpired years ago wasn't what it appeared to be. Perhaps you made a mistake in judging me. Perhaps everything was different." With a start, Kirk got up and paced the room. "Are you aware of what you are doing at this moment?" He yelled. "You're taking me back to hell. This caused me to suffer. My marriage was on the verge of collapse. I came very close to losing my family." Jasmine sat silently, her face hidden by remorse. "I know you hate me," she replied quietly, "but the lab contacted me recently. They redid several records. They discovered discrepancies. I had to tell you." Kirk felt like the ground under him was moving. This wasn't only an error, it was a bomb. One that would shatter the tenuous harmony he had established with Rasheeda. Jasmine inhaled tremblingly. "Kirk, please retake the exam. To be clear, for the truth, for us both." Kirk froze. "Take another test." The mere use of that term sent his thoughts into a tailspin. The media would go berserk if there was a retest. Rasheeda's heart would shatter again if she had to retake the exam. Retesting would cause a deep hurt that he believed had long since healed to reignite. Jasmine nodded slowly as Kirk covered his face with both hands and said, "This will destroy everything." "Perhaps, Kirk. However, the reality never goes away. It returns. Kirk remained silent. He picked up the papers, folded them, and tucked them into his pocket. At last, he remarked in a hushed voice, "I need time." He got up and made his way to the door. With remorse in her eyes, Jasmine observed him. "I apologize," she muttered. "However, you had to know." Kirk walked away without turning around. He was struck strongly by the night air outside. In an attempt to stabilize himself, he inhaled deeply. After opening the vehicle door, he sat down and gazed at his phone. Once again, it glowed. Rasheeda's message. "Dinner is ready, baby. You're where?" Kirk gazed at the message. He was unable to respond. He had no idea where to begin. His thoughts were loud, agonizing, and disorganized as he put the phone face down, turned on the engine, and drove into the night. "How do I tell her?" was all he could think of. "How can I possibly describe this?" The night seemed to go on forever, and the weight of the truth was greater than before. Kirk's hands gripped the steering wheel more tightly than before as he drove into the metropolis. He didn't notice any of the lights, music, or people that filled the streets. That envelope was the only thing on his mind. Those documents. He believed he had permanently fled that nightmare. When all he wanted was to vanish, every traffic light seemed to be taunting him and keeping him still. He wanted to put Jasmine's comments out of his mind. Act as if he had never seen anything. And act as though the past wasn't resurfacing. However, it was, and despite his best efforts, he was unable to ignore it. Rasheeda, meanwhile, was at home with the boys, wrapping up supper. Every few minutes, she continued to look at the front entrance, waiting for Kirk to enter with his typical weary grin. However, he didn't. She looked at the time, looked at her phone, checked the door once again. Nothing. "Will Daddy be arriving?" one of the youngsters inquired. "Yeah, baby. He just got held up," she said, forcing a grin. However, she began to feel something within that she hadn't felt in a long time. When things were awful, she used to get that deep, ancient, nauseating worry. In an attempt to silence those thoughts, she shook her head. She assured herself, "This is not that. He has performed well. He has been dependable. He's just running late." However, the issue with old wounds is that they never really heal. All they do is wait for pressure. And the pressure was increasing tonight. At last, Kirk parked into a peaceful parking next to a park and turned off the engine. The automobile was filled with oppressive quiet. His chest felt constricted as he attempted to breathe carefully while resting his forehead on the driving wheel. Once again, he took the envelope from his pocket. I opened it, gazed at the phrases he had previously committed to memory. Potential errors. Data has been updated. It is advised to retest. He felt nauseous after reading each phrase. His thoughts returned to the turmoil of the past, including the disputes, the cameras, the humiliation, the betrayal Rasheeda experienced, the emotional breakdowns, the therapy sessions, and the years-long rebuilding of trust. Because of inconsistencies, Jasmine now wanted to restore everything. Kirk made a sound of frustration and bitterness. He was unsure whether to drive home, weep, shout, or vanish. He was aware of one thing, though. He was unable to inform Rasheeda, not right now, until he realized what the heck this meant. That is, he took his phone out. There has been no response to Rasheeda's, "Where are you? Be home soon." He wrote, "Busy." He looked at the message for a while before erasing it. He was unable to lie. Not immediately. However, he was also unable to be honest. He closed his eyes and leaned back once more after putting the phone aside. Still rattled after the encounter, Jasmine sat in her apartment across town. She kept looking at the door as if Kirk could return. The guilt was killing her, even though she knew he wouldn't. She had no desire to harm him. She also didn't want to harm Rasheeda. She had no desire to become entangled in this mess once again. However, she became alarmed when the lab contacted her, informed her that something didn't match, and discussed reviewing previous data. She didn't think she could do it on her alone, so she gave the one person who was directly involved a call. Perhaps I ought to have waited, she thought. Perhaps I ought to have kept it a secret until everything was verified. However, it was now too late. Rasheeda paced the living room in the meanwhile. Dinner was chilly. The lads had gone to their rooms, and she had a sinking sensation in her chest when she was by herself. She picked up her phone once again and called Kirk. It rang once. He didn't answer twice or 3 times. The unpleasant scrape from before seemed more intense now. Her pulse rate increased as she began to tap her foot. "All right," she said to herself. Don't make hasty judgments. However, her thoughts failed to pay attention. As Rasheeda had already visited this location, the delayed responses, the ambiguous messages, the absences, the mysteries, he was pardoned by her. With him, she had rebuilt. However, she would always remember. At last, Kirk pushed himself to drive home after starting the vehicle once again. The home was silent as he entered. Too quiet. Rasheeda had her arms folded while seated on the sofa. Her eyes scanned his face right away, looking for something lies guilt, worry, anything. Are you all right? Her voice was stern yet kind as she requested. Kirk paused. That hesitancy was like a strike to her. He said, yeah, just had a lot going on. Her eyes narrowed. Work-related matters. Kirk nodded too quickly. After giving him a long, uneasy glance, Rasheeda said, yes. She didn't trust him, not even a little bit. At the other end of the sofa, Kirk took a seat. Rasheeda did not approach. She refrained from bending over him. She didn't grin. There was a strange feeling between them. It was as if an invisible wall had materialized out of nowhere. Kirk was eager to talk. He wanted to share everything with her. However, how can you say to your spouse, hey, do you recall that incident that almost brought us to ruin? It may not be finished. He was unable to. Not quite yet. He sat silently, gazing at the ground. At last, Rasheeda let out a sigh. You skipped meals. For you, I saved supper, he said softly. I'm not really hungry. She gently nodded once more. She was unhappy, as shown by that nod. Suspicious. Hurt. All right, she responded as she stood up. I'm going to bed. Kirk felt smaller than he had ever felt as he watched her go. He was unable to hold her accountable for her behavior. She had every right to be wary. Kirk collapsed back onto the sofa as the bedroom door shut. In an attempt to settle his thoughts, he ran his hands over his face. However, the reality would not go away. He removed the papers once again and gazed at them in the low light. In the hopes that he had misinterpreted, he read each phrase again. I'm hoping this was an error. I was hoping this was nothing. However, the documents were authentic. The issue was genuine. This was not a dispute, a blog post, or a rumor. It was a document that had the power to completely upend his life. Hours went by. Kirk remained still. He didn't get any sleep. Rasheeda, meantime, was lying awake in the bedroom, gazing at the ceiling. She couldn't stop asking herself, why was he late? Why didn't he send a text? Why did he act so aloof? Why did he seem to be afraid? In an attempt to stop the ideas from spreading, she rolled onto her side and pulled the cover up. However, once they get going, they never stop. God, please don't let this be what I think it is, she eventually said to herself in a murmur. Kirk returned to the living room and looked at the time. 3:17 a.m. He wiped his eyes and muttered, I have to handle this, but how? He was aware that he need answers. He was aware that he need clarification. He was aware that he had to face Jasmine once again, but he was also aware of everything would fall apart if Rasheeda discovered the truth before he did. Leaning back, he closed his eyes and let everything fall on him. Things would worsen tomorrow, much worse. Due to the truth, it never remains undetected for very long. Kirk's face was illuminated by morning sunshine that peeked through the living room drapes. Slowly, bewildered, disoriented, and exhausted from hardly sleeping, he opened his eyes. He had fallen asleep for just a few minutes at a time, his thoughts choked by the same fear. What if everything collapsed once more? His neck stiff and his thoughts hazy, he sat up. He could hear faint activity coming from the kitchen, but the rest of the house remained still. Rasheeda was conscious. He remained seated for a while before mustering the strength to get up. He was reluctant to enter the kitchen. The inquiries in her eyes were something he didn't want to confront. He didn't want to act as if nothing was wrong. However, he was powerless. At last, he got up and made his way slowly to the kitchen. Rasheeda was brewing coffee at the counter. She didn't look